All right, so got my slides up there today. That's good. Thank you, Chris. 2 Samuel 9 begins the story of Mephibosheth, right? Jonathan's son, Mephibosheth. And eventually, I'll say that name wrong. When I do, just chuckle and we'll just keep moving on because it takes a little bit of concentration for me to do that. But just before 2 Samuel 9, I want to look at 2 Samuel 8, something that was covered in some amount of detail as a chapter. But if you would, look at verse 14 and 15. Verse 14 says, he put garrisons on Edom. In all Edom he put garrisons, and all the Edomites became servants to David. And here's the part I want you to pay attention to especially. And the Lord helped David wherever he went. So David reigned over all Israel, and David administered justice and righteousness for all his people. I point this out because in my mind, what happens next with Mephibosheth is a little bit symptomatic from what's going on in this chapter. This is a high point in David's reign, so to speak, in his being a king over this kingdom. It's a time of success, a time of overall peace, a time of triumph. And I think what that means to an extent is a little bit of a time of reflection for David, right? As he looks out over all that's been done, as he looks over the success that they've had, he sort of says, okay, now, what should I be thinking about, right? And one of the things that comes to mind when during a time of relative peace or relative accomplishment is, well, how could I do something for someone else? Or what am I lacking? And I think that's part of it. And I think if you go over to, skipping ahead a little bit, to maybe all the way to chapter 11, which is going to be the story of David and Bathsheba. In verse 1, chapter 11:1, it talks about being in the spring at the time when kings go out to battle. The end of that verse says, but David stayed at Jerusalem. If you skip ahead even to chapter, I think 13, let's see here. Well, we're not going to get there right there today anyway. But it's in 1 Chronicles. We may get there. A little bit ahead, David stays home yet. It mentions again, and one of his generals even says, look, if you don't come out to capture this city, I'm going to claim it for myself. Okay? So I think this point here is a high point, and that relative accomplishment, relative ease, gives time for reflection, but then it seems like it goes too far, that tipping point, where then David's reign, David's being a king, being the king after God's own heart, sort of falters and starts going the wrong way. And then we'll see that play out chapter after chapter after chapter. Yes, David and Bathsheba, but then also Absalom and a number of the things that happen. Nothing is quite the same again. This is my opinion. This is a high point that we just need to consider here. Verse 15, he reigned over all Israel and administered justice and righteousness for all his people. So let's look at chapter 9. We're going to read chapter 9, it's fairly short, and then we're going to come back and talk about it. I may interrupt myself, you know how that goes. So then David said, is there yet anyone left in the house of Saul that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? Now there was a servant of the house of Saul whose name was Ziba, and they called him to David, and the king said to him, are you Ziba? And he said, I am your servant. The king said, is there not yet anyone of the house of Saul to whom I may show the kindness of God? And Ziba said to the king, there is still a son of Jonathan who is crippled in both feet. So the king said to him, where is he? And Ziba said to the king, behold, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Amiel in Lodabar. And please don't rely on Matt Carter's pronunciation of any of those things. Then King David, verse 5, sent and brought him from the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, from Lodabar. Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David and fell on his face and prostrated himself. And David said, Mephibosheth. And he said, here is your servant. We'll pause there for a minute. So if you'd like, turn over to 2 Samuel 4:4. 2 Samuel 4:4. Mephibosheth has been mentioned before. We read it together as a class as we came through 2 Samuel 4:4. Now Jonathan, Saul's son, had a son crippled in his feet. He was 5 years old when the report of Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. Which report would that have been? They were killed. That's right. They were dead. And that report of Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel, and the nurse took him up and fled. And it happened that in her hurry to flee, he fell and became lame, and his name was Mephibosheth. Okay, so makes sense, right? The king is dead. Long live the king. What's the new king probably going to do to the old king? Happen all the time, wipe out his family. Now, David clearly distinguished himself by not being that kind of king, right? But that's sort of tradition. That's sort of what happened. That's what a lot of people expected. That's what a lot of people acted on, thinking they were acting in David's name when David wanted nothing to do with that, right? He executed the person who claimed to have executed Saul, even though it doesn't look like he actually executed Saul. He took credit for it, and David had him killed on the spot. So we know that wasn't David's intent, but we can see the nursemaid. She is now terrified, picks up the child, takes off running, and he becomes crippled until we're still reading about him as a full-grown adult many years later, several years later, and that's how he became crippled. So that's Mephibosheth. If we look then in verse 7, so Mephibosheth had said, "Here is your servant." David said to him, "Do not fear, for I will surely show kindness to you," this is verse 7, "for the sake of your father Jonathan, and will restore to you all the land of your grandfather Saul. And you shall eat at my table regularly." Again, he prostrated himself and said, this is Mephibosheth, said, "What is your servant that you should regard a dead dog like me?" Then the king called Saul's servant Ziba and said to him, "All that belonged to Saul and to his house I have given to your master's grandson. You and your sons and your servants shall cultivate the land for him, and you shall bring in the produce so that your master's grandson may have food. Nevertheless, Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, shall eat at my table regularly." Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. And Ziba said to the king, "According to all that my lord the king commands his servant, your servant will do." So Mephibosheth ate at David's table as one of the king's sons. Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah, and all who lived in the house of Ziba were servants to Mephibosheth. So Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, for he ate at the king's table regularly. Now he was lame in both feet. Okay, that's the entire story we have outlined here. It's not the entire story of Mephibosheth. We're going to come back to that a little bit. But so you might remember this agreement, this covenant that he's referring here to. How did that come about? When did it come about? We've studied it recently. This relationship he had with Jonathan. Give me an example. Come on, somebody, anybody. Tell me you're out there. Somebody tell me. Yes. Hey, our preacher's paying attention. Thank you. Oh, wait. Oh, yes.
You want a definition of friendship? David and Jonathan. I mean, this is incredible. And sometimes, we all need to think about our young people, teaching our young people. What is friendship? And what do your friends encourage you to do or cause you to do? Jonathan helped David to be the man that he was. That's a friend right there.
Great point. Absolutely. That as younger men, adults, but young men, they likely wept on one another's shoulders. They experienced loss, risk of themselves, alienation of Jonathan's own family, where he risked having more than risk. His father was angry at him. He helped one another. And I think about a lot of young people, this war with the world almost that people go through at a certain age, where the tribalism becomes real, right? Them against everything. And you could kind of see that. Reliance on God for sure, God's plan for sure, but they bonded permanently, right, as friends. Yes, Wayne.
You already kind of alluded to it, but one of the things that Jonathan did is he helped David escape his father's wrath.
Great. You remember the example, like when did we think about that occurring? We think about that occurring. When did he save him from the wrath? They had an exchange, they had a little plan. Do you remember how to do it with a bow and arrow? Yeah. They're out in a field essentially, and Jonathan says, "I'm going to go find out the news," and they made out some signals. If I shoot the arrow this way, it's going to mean something. If I shoot this way, it's going to mean something else. And he communicated back to David that David's life was in peril because Jonathan's father, King Saul, was definitely coming after him, right? And so let's go over to make sure I have this here. Let's look at 1 Samuel 20, might be one of those examples. First Samuel 20, verse 16. I want to make sure there's context here. Okay, yeah, this is just after that story I just told briefly about the arrows. And at the end of that, verse 16, so Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, may the Lord require it at the hands of David's enemies. Jonathan made David vow again because of his love for him, because he loved him as he loved his own life. So this kinship, friendship, brotherhood extends most translations further into a covenant. This is an agreement that they made to look out for one another. Let's look at verse 42 of that same chapter. Jonathan said to David, go in safety inasmuch as we have sworn to each other in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord will be between me and you, and between my descendants and your descendants forever. Then he rose and departed while Jonathan went into the city. If you look at 1 Samuel 23, let's go over there. 1 Samuel 23, verse 18. That's not what I want at all. Oh, 23. All right, 1 Samuel 23, verse 18. Thus he said to him, do not be afraid, because the hand of Saul my father will not find you, and you will be king over Israel, and I will be next to you, and Saul my father knows that also. So the two of them made a covenant before the Lord, and David stayed at Horesh while Jonathan went to his house. There are a few other examples. I think chapter 24 repeats it. We'll do one more. Chapter 24 over at verse 21. Chapter 24, verse 21. So now swear to me by the Lord, this is from Saul, that you will not cut off my descendants after me, and that you will not destroy my name from my father's household. David swore to Saul. And Saul went to his home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold. Now, we know that he continued to have difficulties with Saul. But David swore to Saul something that he'd already sworn to Jonathan anyway. He'd already had a covenant with Jonathan. He was already protecting Jonathan and his descendants as much as was within his power. And so he swore the same thing to Saul. And now we have David reigning. Saul is dead. Victory after victory. Expansion of the kingdom. Things are going well. And David becomes reflective of these promises that he had made and looks for a way of fulfilling them. A couple of things about this I think is interesting. One is that the servant, Ziba, back to chapter 9, verse 9. Then the king called Saul's servant Ziba and said to him, all that belonged to Saul and to his house, I'm giving to Jonathan. So, I don't know that it makes this entirely clear, but I think it's pretty clear. I feel like Ziba had already been a servant to Saul during Saul's reign, had been a trusted servant, and had probably continued to maintain Saul's assets. Does that make sense? That he was probably over these things anyway for Saul and for whatever, posterity, for that's my job. I don't know what else to do, and now I'll just keep doing what I've been doing, maintaining these things, because I don't see a lot of argument here. It's not like David said, hey, I'm taking all this stuff from you. I'm giving it all to Jonathan. He basically says, I want you to continue to maintain for Mephibosheth these assets the way that you had maintained for Saul, but Mephibosheth's going to eat with me at my table. Okay? Does that make sense? So Mephibosheth can't maintain these assets anyway. He's not going to go plow fields. He's not going to go collect produce. He's not going to be able to do these things. But even more so, he gets this honor of saying, I'm going to be at the king's table daily, regularly. And I think there's an interesting lesson here to be learned about a couple of things. One is David, okay? What kinds of traits is David displaying here, bringing Mephibosheth, a crippled friend of not even a friend, a relative of a former good friend to the table? He's remembering him. What are some attributes we might say about David because of this? knowing what we have just read about his relationship with Jonathan and the purposes? Any ideas? Loyalty. My favorite word out of this, okay? And who said that? Thank you, Arlene. And so I try not to overlay something on the Bible that the Bible doesn't demonstrate, right? And so I'm glad that you see that, because I see a big trait of loyalty here. Over and over, David demonstrates loyalty. My opinion, yes, obedience to God, not wanting Saul killed. Saul was God's king, but loyalty to the king, right? Loyalty, who was the guy's name? Saul's servant, Saul's captain, Saul's general that came and basically tried to negotiate some peace, and then David's cohorts killed him on the side, right? Abner, thank you very much. Glad you guys were paying attention to Ben's class. So Abner, he displayed some loyalty, speaking up for Abner after the death too. He didn't say, whatever's easiest for me, I'm going to go along, get along, that's fine. He spoke up about his disappointment with what happened there. I think, loyalty to me is one of the most amazing attributes that David shows over and over and over. And we're going to get, as Ben goes along, you're going to see probably 2, 3, 4 more examples of that in David's life, where he displays loyalty. And if we believe that David is a man after God's own heart, that is what the Bible teaches, and we believe that David had some positive attributes. And at this time, pretty much all that David has shown is positive attributes, right? And we know that's going to change in a chapter or two. But loyalty is a big one. We think about any other attributes. Words. It's faithful. Thank you. So we read that he entered into a covenant with Jonathan, right? Not just we're good friends, not just we have a lot of common history, not just I get you because we were in the same place at the same time when we were growing up. That happens a lot, right? Guys I grew up with, some of them, I know them better than anybody, right? My own girls sometimes, I can think, I remember where this comes from. You've been doing that since you were 6, right? You kind of remember those things when you see someone grow, but when you're right there with them, growing, changing, maturing, you kind of know those people better than anybody. But I would suggest, I'm going to come right to you. I would suggest this is more than that, as important as all those things are. This is, he gave his word to someone. They entered into an agreement before God, and he takes that seriously. He's faithful in following through. He's faithful in obeying God, but faithful in a sense of, I will do what I said I will do because that's who I am. That's part of who I am. Does it make sense? Now, we know he trashes that later on. He throws that away. Nobody's perfect. But in this point in time, he's faithful to the covenant that he's made. Yes, sir.
So kind of like bounce off of what you're saying, right? Not specifically like a trait, but I think like end of chapter 8 and the start of like all this chapter shows the importance and rewards you get from keeping your promises. Like verse 8, chapter 8, verse 14, like the Lord preserved David wherever he went. The Lord and David had that relationship, and then it enabled David to go to keep his promise to Jonathan and like show kindness and
great.
These people here.
So faithfulness to the covenant he made with Jonathan, but that we can also overlay faithfulness to God, and that faithfulness leads to God's blessings upon David, right? Those things don't happen in a vacuum. God has told us to be a certain way. I'll come right to you. And when we act the way that God has asked us to act, our life is better. God is faithful to us, which is kind of where I want to go with this a little bit. That David is showing us an attribute that God also is, right? That God is faithful, and David is showing us that. Christine?
Humble.
Humble, I love that. Okay, so Mephibosheth. I see that in what he says. I'm just a dog. Why are you remembering a dog like me? But David is why would I not? Why would I not remember you? I had a promise to your father. You're going to sit at my table, right? Not, he's crippled, right? And I'm not saying, we think about that in a different way now in our world. I'm glad, right? Back then, that was all sorts of things got put on top of someone being a cripple, right? They aren't going to be productive. They may be cursed. They may have things bad. Stay away from them. There's a lot of negative attributes that I am so glad we do not assign today. But David said, no, you're going to sit at my table. A former enemy as far as the world was concerned. You think it makes a lot of sense to have the former king's family sitting around mixing, I'll come right back there, mixing with your people? There are people right now, if you go do this study online, that will say, he's trying to keep his enemies close. Keep your friends close, your enemies closer. I think that is garbage. I don't buy into that for a second. I think if that was the case, David could have just had him killed, right? There's nothing stopping from David from having him killed. But instead, what he says is, well, why would I not? I'm not different than you. God has blessed me, which we've talked about David before. God has let those who stand by the baggage get the same rewards because God's given us these things. I think that's the way David viewed the world. Okay, I had one over here and then one coming back here. Who was over here? Somebody had their hand up. No? Yeah, thank you.
A lot of love is shown here.
A lot of love. I think David's heart's wide open. I think one of the reasons we have the Psalms, the biggest book in the whole Bible full of songs, so many of those are David. I think David's heart is wide open, and a lot of that is just pure love. And I think he's showing his love here. Good. Yes. Who had their hand up? Somebody, I think you're pointing. Yes. Arlene. Integrity. I like that. Integrity, honesty, faithfulness. I think those things all get wrapped up into godly traits we should exhibit because David is showing us that that is a good way to live life, to have integrity in your heart, to be honest with yourself and others. I think I said the other day publicly something about if I lie to somebody, I'm more likely to lie to myself than anybody else. I think that's what happens to David as we go along a little bit. But he's honest with others. He lives with integrity. Yes, the last one. Yes.
So I was just going to say, not to bypass this, but the loyalty aspect, not only loyalty to Jonathan and to his family, and so we briefly touched on it, is loyalty to God in that he, even though Saul was trying to kill him, he was given opportunities to kill him. He was given opportunities to kill Saul. He did not.
Excellent.
He said, "This is God's anointed." And when they tried to brag about killing him, he was like, "Why would you kill God's anointed?"
Thank you. I hope you can hear it. Loyalty, not just to Jonathan, not just to people, but loyalty to God. Coming back to this faithfulness idea, layer after layer, totally intertwined, you get a picture of David's character that is consistent. How he treats God, how he treats others, he keeps his word, he is faithful to his word. He's obedient to God out of faithfulness, out of loyalty, out of thankfulness to God. This is the man, David, the high point, in my opinion, the high point of his reign, when he is he's displaying exactly the kind of character that I hope we would all display. Now, I want to take this a little further. So, Mephibosheth, your master's grandson shall eat at my table regularly. I don't want to get too far. I don't love it when people try to make big points that the Bible doesn't necessarily make out of something, but I do think there's value in it sometimes. One of the reasons this is my favorite chapter, and I'm so glad I got to be able to kind of go through and teach it. On the margin of my Bible, I have a question written there. It says, are we all Mephibosheth? What would I mean by that? In what way are we all Mephibosheth? We don't deserve what we've been given. In fact, we were among the enemy from a perspective, right? We don't deserve to be sitting at the king's table, right? What other ways? Yeah.
We can't go to God ourselves. We're effectively crippled spiritually without Jesus to help us get out.
We are crippled, no doubt. We can't just go straight to God. We can through Christ, and he made that point when he said it. We can go to God through Christ, but we're crippled. We're sinful. We do not deserve to be sitting at the king's table. There's no reason the king should let us eat at his table. In fact, in a sense, I don't want to go too far, but in a sense, we're going to be eating at his table today, right? We don't deserve that. That's not because of something we did. Did Mephibosheth do anything to deserve this? No, his nanny, what do you call it? Nanny camp, is that what you call it? His nanny ran him away and dropped him and crippled him. All he did was just relay to Saul. That's his total accomplishment, being welcomed to the table. Did he deserve it? No. Was there good wisdom in bringing him to the table? No, not necessarily. Except, give me maybe one more thing, and then I got one point if it doesn't get brought up. Anything else? Yes.
The word that I've been thinking about while we talk about all these other words that describe character of people, and it's one that we're taught that we should have for everyone, and it's love.
Love. Yes.
Love.
Exactly right. So he benefits from the love that David has in his heart, the loyalty in his heart. I want to come back to one word. Oh, Joe, may you do it. Yes, sir.
Well, some of these attributes that really stand out, the idea of love. But what about grace? We've seen David be a recipient of God's mercy and grace. How many times have we seen God's grace demonstrated through David? It's not out of the way for David to be extending some grace.
Exactly right. Grace was the word that Joe is using there. Mephibosheth did not deserve this. Mephibosheth, David showed him grace by allowing him this, right? We have mercy, we have grace, right? How they're intertwined. But he is showing him grace just like God shows us grace. I want to come back to a big word. We talk about being faithful. David's covenant faithfulness, right? Shown here. That David said, I will do this. He did that with Jonathan. I will do this for Jonathan's descendants. And then he does. And he shows covenant faithfulness. Does God show us covenant faithfulness throughout his word? Absolutely. Love going through it, right? Yes.
These are all traits of the fruit of the Spirit.
They are. Thank you. They are all. Joe says, list them for me real quick. I'm just kidding.
Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law.
Exactly right. Exactly right. We're going to sing the song together now if you want. I'm just kidding. We're not going to do that. I'm glad you had it open there. So love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. All these things are displayed from David towards Mephibosheth. That's why we teach our kids the fruits of the Spirit. That's why we talk about the fruits that we need to be showing. Now, come back to this covenant faithfulness with me for a second. Where's the first time that we, in a sense, see this covenant faithfulness of God? There's not an exact answer here. It's in Genesis, for sure, right? You pick one. Maybe Genesis 9 with Noah, right? Maybe that's the first time. He probably had a little bit of a covenant with Adam and Eve, meaning if you do this, I will do this, right? And if you don't eat here, then you can stay here. And he was faithful with that, right? I don't know that it uses the word covenant there, but it clearly does with Noah in Genesis 9. Clearly does. We understand this to be true in Genesis 12 with Abraham and all the promises that came through with that. Restated in Exodus 24, restated in Deuteronomy 28, and the group kept getting bigger, right? Exodus 24, I'll come over to you in a second. It was, now all the Israelites were there, took place and said, we will be part of this, just like Jonathan and Samuel said, we will be part of this. And then that grew even bigger to, in Deuteronomy 28, where Moses says, okay, it's not just those who are here, but also all of their descendants down the road. And everyone said, yes, this is our covenant. Yes.
Well, all those times where God's promised something, he's made a covenant with his people. There's a lot of passages that talk about and God remembered his covenant, God remembered his people. And the first verse here in chapter 9, it doesn't use the word remember, but David says, is there still anyone left in the house of Saul that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? So
Yeah.
there's an idea there of David purposefully remembers, he's conscious of the covenant he made, he brings it to mind, and there's a connection there between.
I love the parallel language. Absolutely. I think you could insert that word, he remembered, in here so easily, and it would make total sense, just like we're told that God remembered Israel in Egypt, right? He remembered his covenant with Israel. The covenant was there, and the time came right for God to enact the next part of that. In this case, I don't think it was massive planning or time coming together for David. It was simply the time had come together in the sense that it was a time of peace, a time of reflection, and he remembered his covenant with Jonathan. And once remembering it, being a man full of integrity, being a loyal man, being a faithful man, being a loving man, he then said, I better do this because I said I would do this, right? And that's where that comes about. Now, I love all that. But again, we're getting ready to find out that David has problems. He's a man. He's not God. He's a man. He may have some attributes that we should display, but not all of them. But let's also look at I'm going to go in here. 1 Chronicles 8:34, I think is where I want to go. I'm going to check on one verse real quick before that. No, I'm sorry. Let's go to 2 Samuel 16 first. 2 Samuel 16. Skipping ahead just a little bit. Some other events have occurred. We'll study those soon. Now, when David had passed a little beyond the summit, behold, Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, right? We just read about it, Ziba and Mephibosheth, met him with a couple of saddled donkeys. So Ziba meets him with some donkeys, and on them, this is a time of war for him. He's like Absalom now. They're in a disagreement, and they're having problems internally. David is, and he's out. And on them were 200 loaves of bread, 100 clusters of raisins, 100 summits of fruits, and a jug of wine. The king said to Ziba, why do you have these? And Ziba said, the donkeys are for the king's household to ride, and the bread and summer fruit for the young men to eat, and the wine for whoever's faint in the wilderness to drink. Then the king said, and where is your master's son? And Ziba, remember Micah we mentioned, right? Or Micah. And Ziba said to the king, behold, he is staying in Jerusalem, for he said, today the house of Israel will restore the kingdom of my father to me. So the king said to Ziba, behold, all that belongs to Mephibosheth is yours. And Ziba said, I prostrate myself. Let me find favor in your sight, O my lord the king. So Ziba throws Mephibosheth right under the bus here. True or not, and I'm going to read something else that leaves it up on end a little bit. But Ziba comes out and greets him, and he says, well, where's your master's son? I think he doesn't mean necessarily Micah there. I said that a second ago. I think he's really referring to Saul's son, son of son, Mephibosheth. But either way, we're going to see in the context later on. It's not always a happy ending, right? People are flawed. People aren't what they should be. They don't live up to what they should be. And then here's this sentiment, today the house of Israel will restore the kingdom of my father to me. So no matter who you're talking about, what are they talking about? Well, the time's come now for Saul to be back in the lineage of Saul to be the king again, right? It's sad. Skip ahead with me over to 2 Samuel 19, verse 24. 2 Samuel 19, 24. Then Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, came down to meet the king, and he had neither cared for his feet, nor trimmed his mustache, nor washed his clothes, from the day the king departed until the day he came home in peace. Now that says maybe good things. You might go, oh, why is he not taking care of himself? Well, it might be that he's concerned the king has left, and he is in mourning of some kind. It was when he came, verse 25, from Jerusalem to meet the king, that the king said to him, why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth? So he answered, oh, my lord, the king, my servant deceived me. That's Ziba, right? Deceived me, for your servant said, I will saddle a donkey for myself that I may ride on it and go with the king, because your servant is lame. Moreover, he has slandered your servant to my lord the king, but my lord the king is like the angel of God. Therefore do what is good in your sight. For all my father's household was nothing but dead men before my lord the king, yet you set your servant among those who ate at your own table. What right do I have yet that I should complain any more to the king? So the king said to him, why do you still speak of your affairs? I have decided you and Ziba shall divide the land. Mephibosheth said to the king, let him even take it all, since my lord the king has come safely home to his own house. I think you can take it a couple of different ways, but I'm hopeful that what Mephibosheth says here is true. I'm hopeful that David just doesn't see the whole picture, or David is in a place of terrible stress in his life, running around with his own son trying to kill him. And Mephibosheth says, I didn't have anything to begin with. Why would I begrudge what you gave me? I'll go back to having nothing again, and expresses devotion and love to David. David seemingly doesn't entirely believe it, because then he still splits the land up between the servant and Mephibosheth, right? But it is interesting. You still kind of root for him, because it sounds so true, right? I didn't have anything, and you gave me everything. But that's kind of the complete story of Mephibosheth. Okay, got a minute or two to wind up. Anybody have anything? No? Yes, nope. Just, sorry, Donna. Donna went like this. She's psyching me out back there. Anybody else? Okay, next, on Wednesday, we'll be going to the next chapter. It's technically a review day, but I think I've had enough reviews, so we're going to go through that chapter. We're going to talk about a couple other things. I'm not planning on going back to the beginning of class, and Ben's been the one responsible for this class anyway, so I might do a little bit of that. We might go through some Psalms. If you have, in fact, just tell me, if you have a Psalm of David that you'd be interested in discussing on Wednesday, or even presenting men, if you would like to do that, let me know. I'll carve out a few minutes, because part of me would love to go through some Psalms, and yet I do want to make sure we're covering 1 Samuel or 2 Samuel and Chronicles that go along with it. That's our priority. So thank you for being a great class. You know, I love this, and I appreciate you very much. That's it.